Hi there. I wanted to start a video and just sort of speak from the heart today because something has happened in my personal life, and I didn't really know how to talk about it. Mainly because I had been talking so much about it privately. Of course, I shared about what had happened on my Facebook feed, and that was primarily because I have friends and family there. But um, I didn't really know how to process what had happened, so um, I sort of reached internally and um, communed with God and came to understand a little bit better how to speak about it. And the reason I wanted to do sort of a more intimate Bible study rather than the way that I normally do this, which is with my women's group, is because I think this is really personal. And I think that there are probably a lot of people, especially during the holiday season, who may be struggling with what I am currently struggling with. And so I wanted to speak to that and share my perspective, really to the best of my knowledge. So that's what this is about. I want to give some trigger warnings that I'll be talking about grief and death and medical trauma. And so if those are things that bother you, I would strongly advise that you care for yourself in whatever way that means. And this may not be the best suited for you at this time. So with that said, um, my father very unexpectedly passed away about 2.5 weeks ago, I guess almost 3 weeks ago now. Now, I say unexpectedly, the man was 83. So I'm smiling because he and I talked at great length about his life and the length of his life. He always said that he was going to live to be 100. And I was like, you treat your body like a trash can, dude. I'm surprised you've made it this far. And we would joke about it. Um, and I he got very sick a few years ago with the flu, and I was honestly surprised that he made it through that. But when I say unexpectedly, um, he hadn't been feeling well. We'd gone to the ER the week before. They ran all the blood tests. They checked his heart because he has had heart problems in the past. Um, and everything came back mostly normal. I mean, he was a little dehydrated, but he runs literally on cigarettes and Pepsi. So that's not something I that would have been unexpected for me. And I didn't see it coming. Um, Everything else was pretty normal. And so they sent him home. We thought maybe he was having acid reflux or something, that there was some sort of GI problem that he was having the week before. And that's how we treated it. I thought at one point maybe he had developed an ulcer or something. Um, so, I have just about every medication in the pharmacy um, in my hands. So I did what I could to support him and do the things that I know. At one point, I thought maybe it's an ulcer. So we started giving him some stuff, ulcer meds in addition to his GI meds. He did start to feel a little bit better. He was able to eat. He was able to get up and move around a little bit, but he started to go downhill again. And day after day, he just really wasn't looking well. And so the day that we took him into the ER, that day I actually did an online appointment with an online doctor. And I thought, let's do it this way and we'll see, we'll kind of see what we can figure out. Um, and he they were so close to giving us steroids because we thought maybe this is a flare up of his COPD. And we were very close. She was like just about to hit the go button on that. Now he lives in Denver, but was staying with us and was pretty close to making the transition from Denver to Salt Lake City because he was he just needed extra care. So, the chances are that he was going to make this transition permanent. Um, so that's why we didn't take him to a regular doctor. So that's why we were doing an online doctor. But last minute she said, I think you should go into the ER and be evaluated. And I was like, all right, whatever you say, doc, let's go to the ER. So we went to the ER. Same ER, had him evaluated, and he we go in, they run all of the tests. This time all of the tests come back and all of the blood work is abnormal. I mean, it was like when, you turn on your car and something's wrong and all of the check engine lights come on, and that's what it was like. So I knew something was bad. And his troponin in his heart was normal, but his D-dimer was extremely elevated. I mean, it was off the charts. And so I knew something was very wrong because his heart was working so hard. And so the doctor came in and was like, it could be elevated because he has an infection of some sort. I mean, all of his other numbers were showing that there was some sort of infection or there was some sort of something. So he said, I'm going to do a CT scan and we're going to just see if maybe he has a pulmonary embolism, maybe there's something else. Um, could just be COPD. Okay. Again, he's like, I'm pretty sure this is COPD. So we're going to check. And if everything looks good, we're going to send you on your way. We ordered oxygen so that he had oxygen, for the car ride home. We were all sure that's what it was. So we do that. Meanwhile, my brother, I'm texting everybody, hey, keeping people in the loop, what's going on. My brother Chris is like, hey, do I need to come? And I said, I don't think so, but I'll let you know. About 15 minutes later, the doctor comes in and I can see the look on his face. And he said, I don't know how to tell you this, so I'm just going to tell you. He said, your father's had an aortic dissection. And it has dissected from his heart all the way down his abdomen. And in that moment, I was not my Christian self. And I said, holy shit. And I said it so loud. You need to know I said it so loud that I was surprised people didn't come from another room because it was not what I was expecting. I knew in that moment, I need to tell you that I am not a doctor, but I have seen all the episodes of Grey's Anatomy in every season no less than 6 times. And so I know what an aortic dissection is, and I know how it works, and I know that it is a violent situation internally, and I know that what he just told me, I knew what that meant. He didn't even have to tell me what he said next, which is that he had already spoken with the cardiothoracic surgeon and that my father was not a surgical candidate. I knew that before he told me. And he said that events like this are a 1% per hour mortality rate, which basically means that once it starts to when it ends, people survive 1% per hour. It is a 100-hour event, which meant that he had already survived longer than they would have expected him to. And he recommended that we put him in hospice care immediately. So the question was, do we send him home to hospice care, or do we leave him in the hospital? Now, because he was traveling and he did not have insurance that allowed him travel, we had to put him in hospice. If he lived here, we could have taken him home. But we put him into hospice. The moment that he said aortic dissection, I immediately texted my brother and I said, you need to come. He reached out to my other brother, Mike. They started putting things in motion. When the doctor left the room, I asked my dad if he understood what happened, and then I explained to him what was happening. Then I had to call my brothers and I had to tell them what was happening. And then I had to call my daughter. And then I had to start calling family. The reason I tell you all of this is because, number one, it was not what I expected to happen. We got upstairs when we finally got into the hospital room. Now I have to tell you, my dad was awake and normal for, I don't know, a whole day and a half. Matter of fact, the next day, well, later that day, no, it was the next day, it was Friday, he asked, you know, it was later that day, he said, if the boys are coming, why can't we just go home and then tomorrow we'll go out to breakfast? Because he didn't understand the gravity of what was happening. So I had to explain to him in slightly greater detail that this was going to end his life and that there was no way around it, and that he needed to be in the hospital and attached to something that would keep him alive. Not alive, but comfortable. He needed the oxygen or he would suffocate. He needed the everything. So he also needed the medication that would keep him comfortable, and there was no negotiating that. Otherwise, it would be extremely painful for him. So my brother arrived, and that was the very next, my brothers arrived the very next morning, and when they came with their respective partners, spouses, we flew my daughter in, and she came the next day, and he was awake. He was able to receive all those people. And then my brother's whole family came in, and they were all able to say their goodbyes. My niece was not able to come. She has two kids, and she opted to stay in Denver. Um, and there's a variety of reasons why that's important for her. Um, we all make our decisions, and sometimes that comes with regret. And, um, but I'll tell you what, she was on the phone with us a lot while we were saying our goodbyes. She was with us on the phone while he was literally transitioning and doing his last breaths. Um, and and she was no less a part of his experience as he said goodbye than any of us were. Um, my father in his last, you know, in his last days and hours expressed relief, I think, to be going home to Jesus, but he expressed a lot of anxiety and fear for leaving us behind. And it didn't matter what I said, that we all were going to take care of one another and that we all had one another and that we were all doing the thing that he had taught us to do, which was to step up and to care for one another, that he was he was very worried that he was leaving us behind. And um, I think that was really hard for me because, more than anything, I wanted him to see that we were all there for each other and with one another. Even Bree, who was back in Denver, was still showing up. This video is going to be the end of me. Even Bree, who was still back in Denver, was still showing up. Matter of fact, the um, he was doing a lot of sleeping, and every now and then he would wake up because the pain would start to be a lot, and he would wake up, and we were just a little bit behind on the pain meds. We had a great nurse. She was literally the greatest nurse. And when we figured out that we needed to be Johnny on the spot with the meds, she set a timer and she was on it. But as we were figuring that out, he would sometimes wake up. And we called Bree at one point, and he woke up to say I love you to her. And I can't tell you how important that is because he loved her so much. I used to say that she was like a mini me. She was the only other person that would check him like like I would. Um, when he decided to quit drinking, I mean, I kind of put my foot down, but she was the only other person who like, really had the same sort of like, Papa, if you don't quit drinking, I'm going to quit calling you. And um, she was the only other person that had that kind of pull on him like that. And everybody had their own kind of relationship. Like my daughter had a very unique relationship with him. He doted on her, and he was like just such a stereotypical grandpa. She could have chocolate for breakfast. She could go over there and run the house. She could um, request, spaghetti and syrup for dinner, and he would give it to her. Like it didn't matter what it was. She could do anything, anything, and he would give it to her. She loved him, and he loved her, and I love that. But the fact that he woke up to say, I love you to Bree, man, that was so special to me. So I made the decision to take his oxygen off when it was time. because I knew the oxygen was keeping him here. And I knew it was the right thing to do. But it messed with me for a little bit. I was glad I did it. I was relieved that his pain and suffering was over. But the grief for me has been unbearable. Now, you need to know that I am not a fan of this time of year. I'm not a fan of the holiday season. I mean, I like Thanksgiving, but I hate Christmas. I hate everything about Christmas. I know Jesus is the reason for the season and all of those things, but if I'm being honest, I can worship Jesus without Christmas. I can be grateful, and I am grateful for my Savior every day. But this season brings me absolute dread. And knowing that I'm going to be facing it now without my dad, who is the my favorite man who's ever lived, I can't begin to tell you how hard that is for me. I spent the first week after he died literally going through every day leading up to his passing, wondering what I did wrong, if I should have done something differently, asking myself if I should have pushed harder for him to quit smoking, if I, like, literally everything looping over and over in my head, how I could have done something different. Could I have kept him with me longer? And in doing that, I prevented feeling anything because all I was doing was analyzing his final days. I was angry a lot. I was angry that he was taken from me because he was supposed to live here and that we were supposed to have our time. I was already planning, what the summer would look like with he and I in the garden. And I was already planning on putting plants down in his room. And so he would have some of his favorite plants to tend to or to watch grow, and I would tend to them so that he could live the easy life that he deserved. I was looking forward to rescuing him in his final days the way that he rescued me. Everything in my whole life was leading to this. And so losing him robbed me of that. That's what I thought. And I struggled with it. And God tells us to lean on him, cast all of your anxieties on him because he cares about us. And so I started to do that. And I asked God, what wisdom would you have for me at this time? Because I know that there is some. And there's a lot of stories we've heard, and we've heard them over and over again. But I really, in this season of my ministry, one of the things that I really like doing is looking at the same Bible story from a different perspective. So one of the things that God pointed me to was the story of Lazarus and his resurrection. Now, we've all heard this. The specific scripture that God gave me is one that we've all heard, and we've all heard it a lot. And honestly, it's a little bit trite if I'm being honest. But when I asked what What would he have for me? What word would he have for me at this time? All he said was Jesus wept. And it's funny sometimes when I lean on him in these moments of desperation and he gives me something and I'm like, really, bro? This is what you've got? Because in that moment, I was like, I'm looking for something so big and profound and something that matches this uncontainable grief. And in that moment, he gave me the smallest scripture in the Bible. And so you need to know, sometimes I find his sense of humor really funny because I was like, are you kidding me with this? So I didn't laugh at first. I actually was kind of mad about it because I was mad about everything. And if you've ever gone through grief, then you will know that you get mad at everything. But nonetheless, um, I I read it and then I read the whole story again. And I've read it before. And I I kind of thought, okay, Jesus is God is asking me, Jesus is asking me to read this and to understand it, but he's asking me to go deeper because anytime he gives me something like this that seems very simple, it's because he's asking me to look at it from a different perspective. And so there were a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. I know I've been talking for a long time, but this is the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to share. When we read this story, we're often thinking about the miracle of the resurrection of Lazarus. And it was, and it is. But there are other things happening in this story, and it's important for anybody who's grieving to know what else is happening here. So the story goes like this for anybody who's stumbling on this who may not know the story or may not be as familiar with it. Lazarus is Jesus's friend. So you know, the story comes from John chapter 11. And in the very first verse, it says, a man named Lazarus was sick. He lives in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. And the story goes on to say that um, Mary, um, Mary was Mary was extremely devoted to Jesus. They were both very devoted to Jesus, but um, Mary was so devoted that she had poured the expensive perfume um, on Jesus's feet and wiped his feet with her hair. So she was like very devoted to Jesus. Um, so the two sisters, Mary and Martha, they send a message to Jesus, and they say, "Lord, your dear friend is very sick." But when Jesus hears about it, he doesn't run to heal him. He doesn't have to run to heal him. Jesus can think it. He doesn't even have to lift a finger. He can heal him by doing nothing, and he chooses not to. And even though he loves Lazarus, he loves him like a brother, he chooses not to do anything. And he says Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. It happens for the glory of God, for God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. And so even though Jesus loves Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stays where he was for 2 days, and then he says, let's go back to Judea. Now, his disciples know that the last time he was in Judea, they almost stoned him to death. And he's like, wait a minute, are you sure? Um, like, are you sure you want to go back there? Because the last time you were there, they tried to kill you. And he says, um, well, I've got to go back. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up. But the disciples, it's so funny to me. The disciples are so funny, and it reminds me often of myself. And like, even in this story that I'm telling you, Jesus gives me the scripture. Jesus wept. God gives me the scripture. Jesus wept. And I say, really, bro? Like, I know that God gives me things that are complex in very simple scriptures. And my first reaction is always like, why are you giving me something so simple when my need is so complicated? I'm not so unlike the disciples, and neither are you. So sometimes we look at the disciples with such judgment because we think, like, I can't believe that they asked him this question. Like, how do they not know? They should know Jesus by better. I should know Jesus better, and I still struggle. So, like, who am I to make that sort of judgment? So the disciples say, um, Lord, if he's sleeping, he'll get better. And they thought that Jesus meant that Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant that Lazarus had died. So what I was gonna say is I think it's funny that they, even though they know that Jesus often talks in riddles, that they don't recognize that he talks in riddles. But like, who am I to judge that? Because he talks in riddles to me too. And it still takes me a moment to catch on. So think about that the next time that God is saying something and you don't catch on right away. Like, slow down and think about what he's giving you. So he says very plainly, Lazarus is dead. Can you imagine? He's like, our friend Lazarus is sleeping and we must go wake him up. And they're like, well, if he's sleeping, he'll get better. And then can you imagine Jesus just deadpanning and being like, Lazarus is dead? Um, I just think it's funny. He says, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go get him. Let's go see him. So Thomas, now we know Thomas as doubting Thomas, but his name was Didymus. Um, he says to his fellow disciple, let's go too and die with Jesus. So Thomas is kind of funny because I very often, um, I, Thomas gets a bad rap, but Thomas has got this really sort of, I think, like wry sense of humor where he says this, let's go die with Jesus. Well, remember just a few minutes ago, they said, are you sure you want to go, Jesus? And the reason he says, let's go die with Jesus is because last time he was there, he was going to die. So now Thomas is basically saying, well, if he's going to go die, we're going to go die with him, So when he says that, I think it's just important to note what he's actually saying. He's not going to say, like, he's he's basically making a joke, even though it's not. It's like it's just a very dry, I think it's just very dry humor. I love the Bible sometimes because we read it so seriously, but I think it's kind of endearing. So they arrive in Bethany. He was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was a few miles down the road, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha says to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. So Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And she says, he will rise when everyone rises at the last day. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? Yes, Lord, she says, I've always believed you are the Messiah, Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God. Then she returned to Mary. So it's this difference. Watch how Mary reacts. There's a reason I'm going through all of this because it's really important in terms of how grief is processed. Um, so she goes inside, she calls Mary, and she says, the teacher is here and wants to see you. Mary goes out to see him. And then Jesus stays outside the village. So keep in mind. They're inside the village. Jesus is still outside the village at the place where Martha went to meet him. So the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed that she was going to Lazarus's grave to weep. So they followed her there. But when Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. Mary and Martha say the same thing. That's important. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. Where have you put him? He asked. They told him, Lord, come and see. Then Jesus wept. The people who were standing by said, see how much he loved him. And some said, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside. Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I say it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. Okay. So the reason I read that entire chapter, somewhat paraphrased, is because there's some important things that happen. And I think it's really important that you hear me. If you are somebody who is grieving, I want you to look at how Martha handled this, how Mary handled this, and how Jesus handled this. I'm going to fix this video. Hold on. All right. Coming back. Okay. So Martha comes out and she's so matter of fact. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And she has a whole conversation about theology with Jesus, right? How many times did I, in all of this happening, handle the logistics of death? I'm in there talking about medications and, I'm thinking about, you know, where he's going to be cremated. And I'm thinking about all of these things, right? And then, you know, this video is going to kill me. All right, hold on. Okay, we're back. Mary, on the other hand, is just in feeling mode. She throws herself at his feet and she's weeping, right? She's just experiencing the grief of the death. She's just crying. Jesus, on the other hand, is experiencing a couple of really interesting feelings. Number one, he cries. Now, what I love about this is that Jesus in this moment, not only does he weep, but he also experiences anger because he says, when he saw her weeping and saw the other people with her, wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. I think that's a really unique perspective because as Jesus is there, and this isn't something that I've ever heard talk about, and I studied on it for a little while. Um, and I talked with my pastor about it, and I just found it such an interesting perspective that Jesus would both weep and be angry at this scene unfolding in front of him. And I asked myself, like, was he was he angry because of the wailers? What did he find the grief performative? Was he angry because he knew what was about to happen and he was angry because they didn't believe? Um, or was this just another part of grief and he was allowing his humanity to, was he allowing himself to experience the grief, the humanity of grief? And, you know, could it be all of those things? So the reason I'm sharing all of this is that sometimes I think there's this expectation that because we know that our loved one has been called home to Christ, that we feel a certain level of peace with it and that we experience an acceptance, or that we put this rush on a need to feel acceptance. And, acceptance will come. You will find it. But if even Christ rolls up on a scene that he knows he is about to bring this man back from the grave, and even in that moment, he allows himself the grace to step into his humanity and weep. He receives Martha and does not rebuke her for her grief in that moment where she is um, frustrated and disappointed in how Lazarus dies. He receives Mary in her grief where she's just sobbing at his feet, and he doesn't correct her either. Again, knowing full well that he tells them, I am going to bring your brother back. And they know who he is, and they know he's the Son of God. What would make you think that there is a timeline or an expectation that you receive peace and that you don't cry and that you don't allow yourself the grace to go through the stages of grief with any sort of timeline of expectation? It would be foolish to think anything else. And the reason I am sharing that is because in this holiday season, in any season, there's no reason to put yourself through that. There's no reason to think this video will catch up with me eventually. There's no reason to think that you need to put yourself on some sort of accelerated healing schedule. If you are angry, be angry. If you need to cry, you need to cry. If you want to, loop through all the things that happened in the last 2 months and question every decision you ever made about your dad's healthcare and the choices that he made and his diet and all of the Pepsi that he drank. And like, if that's what you need to do, then that's what you need to do. But know this, know that God is still the one making the decisions. And that even if you had done every single thing right, if he decided to call your loved one home, even if you did everything right, there was still never anything in your hands anyway. Don't confuse grieving with control, because it's not that. Even if I would have done everything right, the moment that God decided that it was time for my dad to come home, then that's his call. And that's the one thing that I've learned in the last couple of weeks. That's learned is not the right thing. I knew that already. That's the one thing I've come to peace with. Now, I wouldn't say that I have full peace with losing my dad. I don't know when that'll happen or if that'll ever happen, but I don't have that today. What I do have is I have the acceptance of knowing that I was never in control of it, that there was nothing I could have done differently. And I know that my dad went to heaven. I know that for sure. I know that he was saved. I know that he loved me. I know that he loved me. And I loved him probably more than I love almost anybody else. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that time that I got to love a dad who unfailingly showed up to be my hero, who never, ever, ever allowed me to feel like I was less than the most important girl in his life. He made me number one, always. He chose me all the time. He's been my favorite since I can remember ever choosing a favorite anything. And I got a whole lifetime to love him. And if I'm being honest, he could have lived to be 183 and it still wouldn't have been long enough. So if you're grieving this season, or maybe it's July and you're in a season of grief, I want you to know that you're not alone. And that God is still with you. And if he sent his only son to this earth, and that the Son of God, with all of his ability and knowledge, and he can step into his grief and he can weep with you, then you have full permission to grieve too. Take your time with it. You'll be okay. Until next time.